Spring of 2013. What's happening then? Well, a new book is coming out, Innocent on the Bounty, The Court-Martial of Midshipman Peter Heywood. And it's edited by Donald A. Maxton and Rolf de Roots. And our next speaker just happens to be Donald A. Maxton. It's the first complete publication of the Heywood family correspondence and should be very interesting. Don is visiting us from New York with his charming wife, Marie, and he's been a corporate communications professional for 30 years. When I was a high school English teacher, I dreamed of students like Donald. He read Mutiny on the Bounty by Nordhoff and Hall, followed by seeing the Clark Gable, Charles Lawton film, and it inspired him to learn more and more about the Bounty and Pitcairn. He has written or edited 2 books and several articles on various aspects of the mutiny, and in 2008 worked with the Highgate School and the Manx Heritage Foundation to create a memorial plaque in St. Michael's Chapel, Highgate School in London, for Peter Heywood. It's a pleasure to welcome Donald to the podium.
Thank you very, very much, Barbara. I might mention, too, that the book that Barbara mentioned is coming out in the spring, also published by McFarland, which obviously is building up a very nice source of references on the Bounty and Pitcairn Island. Okay. From one-penny tabloids to the dignified pages of National Geographic magazine, the popular press has been dipping into the deep well of the Bounty saga since the early 1800s, actually the 1790s. This morning, let me take you on a brief tour of what I like to refer to as Mutiny in the magazine section. News of the Bounty mutiny and William Bligh's spectacular open boat voyage immediately sparked the interest of just about everyone in England. In May 1790, barely 1 year after the mutiny, the Gentleman's Magazine devoted a page to these events. Almost overnight, an entertainment called The Pirates, or The Calamities of Captain Bligh, opened at the Royalty Theatre. Years later, the discovery of the settlement on Pitcairn Island revived public interest in the Bounty. This led to additional stage entertainments, shows, such as the advertisement for this one, which has a rather cumbersome title, but I'll read it to you because I think it's kind of amusing. It's called A New Romantic Operatic Ballet Spectacle, quotes, or in parentheses, I should say, founded on the recent discovery of a numerous colony formed by and descended from the mutineers of the Bounty frigate, called Pitcairn Island. And that's a mouthful, I have to admit. Sir John Barrow, he renewed interest in the subject when he published The Eventful History of the Mutiny and Piratical Seizure of the Bounty. Since then, and that's about 1832, I believe, articles about the Bounty and Pitcairn Island have been appearing as staples in the popular press, right up to the present day. Here's an early example. The One Penny Chronicles of the Sea, which came out weekly for about 2 years, I think, in England, published 2 issues, consecutive issues about the mutiny. This article featured nicely detailed illustrations of Bounty and Pandora, of course. That shows the Pandora wreck. And if you look closely, you can see Pandora's box there as well. Nice illustrations, I think. In the 1860s, the Sailor's Magazine, which was a publication of the Seaman's Friends Society, they published a 48-page biography of Bounty midshipman Peter Heywood. While it does include some accurate information, it's laced with quotes from the scriptures, and facts are frequently ignored or distorted, in some cases, to express the society's viewpoint and provide a moral lesson to the reader. In fact, the 19th century was a virtual golden age of popular periodicals, such as Cassell's Family Magazine, Harper's New Monthly Magazine, actually dozens more. With its history of violence, followed by religious redemption, the story of Pitcairn Island was a favorite with readers of that era, and numerous retellings appeared in periodicals throughout the 19th century. In 1871, Harper's serialized part of a book by Lady Belcher, who was actually Peter Heywood's stepdaughter. It was entitled The Mutineers of the Bounty, and in addition to the mutiny, it also discussed at length the settlements on Pitcairn and Norfolk Island. This particular article opened with a portrait of a person we heard about yesterday, school teacher and pastor George Nobbs. There's another illustration, this one of Norfolk Island, from that same article in Harper's New Monthly Magazine. Now, Cassell's Family Magazine published in 1880 The Pitcairn Islanders and the Mutiny of the Bounty, which included this famous, this famous illustration of John Adams' grave on Pitcairn with, looks like sun rays coming down from the clouds above. Also, the church and school, built by John Adams, accompanied that article. Let's move on a little bit to a different type of magazine. Now, this cover is not about Pitcairn, it's about the Afghan War. But the Illustrated London News was a weekly paper that ran for nearly 100 years. And over its long life, it published a number of Bounty Saga articles, such as The Pitcairn Islanders, which included this aerial view of Ship Landing Point and Adamstown down there. Now, let's just move ahead. We're almost in the 20th century now. Let's go right ahead. Now, probably not many of you have seen this magazine, which was a two-penny paper entitled The Thriller, mostly devoted to mysteries and suspense stories, but I discovered that in 1936, it published or serialized over several issues Nordhoff and Hall's Mutiny on the Bounty, declaring it to be the finest true life story ever written. Well, that may be true, but what I actually discovered is the novel they serialized was Men Against the Sea, accompanied by a rather inexpensive illustration, a still from the movie. It's kind of obvious that the Thriller was running on a very tight budget. They couldn't afford much more than that, I suppose. Most of these issues are falling apart, and they're very difficult to find. Now, we're still in the 1930s. Who would ever thought that Popular Mechanics would publish an article about the Bounty? Why? That's a battleship, right? Of some type. But that's just what they did in this issue from 1936, The Secrets of the Movie Ships. And guess what? One of those movie ships is the Bounty, as it appeared in the Clark Gable movie. Right, Barbara? So that was Secret of the Movie Ships. At just about the same time, an English publication, we didn't see too much of it in the United States, mostly directed at a young audience, called the Blue Peter, which, if any of you are curious, that's a special signal flag that welcomes passengers onto a ship. The famous Bounty scholar Owen Rutter, he published an article called The Travels of Fletcher Christian. This was based on what we know to be, of course, his fictional correspondence. Rutter called it one of the most interesting frauds in the history of travel literature. So thank goodness he didn't publish it as a true story. Now, in the 1930s, alongside magazines on the racks, paperback books started to appear. The first ones were issued by a company called Pocket Books, which I think is still an imprint of Simon & Schuster. Eventually, they secured the right to reprint Nordhoff and Hall's Bounty trilogy novels. The first editions appeared in the 1940s, mid-1940s. Now, the low prices and colorful covers of these books gave millions of readers the chance to buy an inexpensive edition and read the actual novels that inspired the famous film, the famous MGM film. Now, one paperback set was issued to tie in with the 1962 film version Two of the volumes included a picture of Marlon Brando with his future wife, Tarita, whom he met during the filming. Each of these volumes featured a nice little color shot of a color still for the film. And again, we know that this movie didn't really treat all this material, but they published the novels nonetheless. Now, along with the rise of paperbacks, now I think some of you may remember this, a very significant and famous comic book was issued. Oops, let me just backtrack for a second on the paperbacks. Pocketbooks also issued a scholastic version of Mutiny on the Bounty, which was actually sold in school classrooms. And who knows, this may be the one I read back in my high school days. Now, other publishers did a very good service of making available in paperbacks more serious scholarship on the bounty, such as this particular book, Saga of the Bounty, Richard Howe's Captain Bligh and Mr. Christian, another edition of Captain Bligh and Mr. Christian re-entitled The Bounty as a tie-in to the Mel Gibson, Anthony Hopkins film. And an outfit called Pyramid Books published this edition of Jack London's stories, including that famous one we've all heard about, based on a true incident, The Seed of McCoy. This illustration kind of ties in with with something I'm going to show you later on, the popular men's magazines of that era. Now we move to Classics Illustrated. This particular comic book attracted millions of young readers, including yours truly. This 100th issue, published in 1952, was Nordoff and Hall's Mutiny on the Bounty, quickly followed by, as you may notice, they also included educational material in Classics Illustrated. I'm sorry that the bottom of that is cut off there. Anyway, Mutiny on the Bounty was quickly followed by Men Against the Sea, two different covers, which kind of points to the popularity of it over the years. Some of the comic art was really quite nicely done. I think this two-page spread, which the comic book fell open to that, I think it's particularly impressive. I think it captures the danger of the open boat voyage quite well. Now, some of the images in Pitcairn's Island, the Classics Illustrated version, were so violent that Classics Illustrated actually took it out of print for 7 years. That's one of the more mild ones. Like Classics Illustrated, there was an outfit called Gold Key Comics. And this Gold Key published, again, the Brando version of the film inspired lots of publications, including something in Life magazine. They published this issue with a cover of a very dashing Marlon Brando wielding a cutlass during the mutiny. This Gold Key Comics also included educational material, a little item for people to read called Pitcairn Island Today. There's someone operating a ham radio there. Now here's another magazine that couldn't resist satirizing the Marlon Brando movie. This story, or their version, was called Mutiny on the Bouncy. And I'm sure most of you have seen this movie. It makes a little bit of fun of the way Marlon Brando was dressed. It went a little overboard, I think, but you get the picture, right? Now, Mad Magazine's writers obviously had a lot of fun satirizing Brando's reputation during the filming as a rather fussy actor. If you notice over on the side here, one of the cameramen or one of the producers just saying, "Hoo boy, another $1 million down the drain." He's decided to go off with Tarita for a while. Now, I made a reference to men's magazines just a moment ago. This is one of the countless Historians call these usually stag magazines. They were oriented specifically towards a male audience, and they started in the 50s and went right through the 60s, like this one from 1969. Now, here's one of my favorite stories from that magazine. I survived the savage mutiny on the Bounty. Okay? See anything wrong with this picture? I don't think it was exactly concerned with historical accuracy. I actually read this terribly written article and or story, and it is supposedly based on Peter Heywood's secret diary. Now, as you can see, the native women, how they got on board for the mutiny, I have no idea. And actually, they look a little more like English or American women than Tahitians. In the story, one of these women is Peter Heywood's island paramour. Now, can you blame young, red-blooded Peter Heywood for staying with the ship instead of getting into Bly's launch? I think we may have found the true answer for that there. How could he not? I think that's, excuse me. This young gentleman here, I don't know if that's Heywood. He has a dagger in his hand. That was probably Tom Ellison, who you know, of course, was court-martialed and hung. He was only about 16 years old, several years after his events. Now, there were more sophisticated publications that appeared on the magazine racks, sometimes right alongside those men's magazines. For decades, National Geographic, as you know, has been publishing superb articles, photographs, and illustrations about the Bounty, Pitcairn Island, and Norfolk Island. Louise Martin's article in this October 1985 issue also includes some outstanding artwork. I think this painting of the Pandora at Tahiti is one of the best artistic renderings of that scene. The centerpiece is probably George Stewart's wife, Peggy, holding up their baby, so hopefully poor imprisoned George Stewart can see them from Pandora's box here on the right onto the ship there, on the ship's deck. And also, as you can see, that there are other Tahitian women, probably, friends or lovers of the other prisoners, are doing the ritual scratching of their scalps with shells or perhaps shark's teeth. The color doesn't really come through clearly here, but there's a lot of blood in it. Now, this next painting by the same artist shows the prisoners escaping from Pandora's box at the wreck. I think this brilliantly captures the desperate action of that tragic event. Now, I just want to step back in time several decades and look at some fine illustrations I discovered of men against the sea in Pitcairn's Island, serialized by the Saturday Evening Post in 1933 and 1934. Men Against the Sea, with illustrations by Anton Otto Fischer, one of their regular artists who did many of their covers. He did the illustrations for this particular serialization, which ran over about 6 issues, I believe. Now, I'm going to display each of the pictures with its caption so you can read it, and I'll provide the context. And unfortunately, it's cut off at the end there. So, after the mutiny, Bly and the crew prepared to make a landing on the island of Tofua. And one boat buried their nose in each breaking wave. Stand by to come about. I'm sorry, I can't quite read what he says there. It says, hard a lee. Okay, can't quite make that out. Now, when Bly, after they make the landing, Bly recognized, of course, the hostility of the natives, and they slowly retreat toward the beach of this unforgettable scene. Quartermaster John Norton, you may remember, was killed in the attack that followed before they escaped. In one of several confrontations with Bly, that's ship's carpenter, what was his first? William Purcell. William Purcell, who was wounded in the head at that attack, he insists that they make a landfall instead of staying on the open sea, and disregarding the danger of hostile islanders that they just confronted. Bly, of course, convinces him otherwise. Here, as Bly sails the ship through the Fiji Islands, the crew is pursued by islanders who may have cannibalistic intentions. They weren't going to stick around to find out. Once again, Purcell refuses an order of Bly's and declares that he's quite as good a man as Bly himself. And Purcell, as you could see, decides to back down, very wisely, I think. In this scene, shows a terrific water spout that was not only a great danger, but also a very awe-inspiring phenomena for the crew. This ad from the Saturday Evening Post advertises the fact that Pitcairn's Island is going to run soon. Again, I'll provide the context here just a little bit. You can read the captions. And this scene, Christian, they're rowing around the island looking for a safe landing, which was not an easy thing to do. Here in this, which is a double-page spread in the magazine, Christian asked Brown if he had checked to see if there were any people here before us, and Brown said, "I never even thought of that." Of course, they discovered that there had been people there before, but not at the present time. Hoodia, an attractive 19-year-old in this scene, spies on Christian Young as they walk through an island glade. Here, in a terrific gale, Christian and Ned Young discover that the storm has hidden the wreck of the Bounty that's already been burned. Now, here's the way I wish it could have been printed. This is Colonel's original painting, and which was unfortunately not printed in color in the magazine. Here are Pitcairn's new residents, toiling to bring in yams for planting in the fertile fields and for the day's feast. Now the trouble begins. Teimoa provides Sarah a piece of a large albacore that Tedahiti has caught. And Tedahiti has just told Teimoa how furious he is at the white man's treatment. Here the Tahitian men prepare to murder Isaac Morton. After the murders begin, a rather brawny-looking Alexander Smith on the right there runs to see if Christian and Young have survived. Here's Colonel's original painting of the scene. Here, Minari spies two of the men below, on the rocks below. Kerner's original painting. Here's Matthew Quintal, who is surprised to discover that the women have constructed a fort for their own protection. It's a striking scene. While the children of Pitcairn look on, Prudence and Moetua attempt to shoot Quintal, who has descended into savagery. Following the deaths, finally, of Quintal and McCoy, Smith and Young are welcomed back into the new society that the women are building on Pitcairn Island. And here's a lovely painting that unfortunately was not used in the serialization. Let's turn now to a more contemporary array of periodicals. In 1988, Smithsonian Magazine posed that evergreen question, whatever happened to Mr. Christian of HMS Bounty? Let's try to find out. No, that's not 90-year-old Fletcher Christian on the cover of British Heritage magazine. It's Christopher Lee as the evil wizard Saruman in Lord of the Rings. But this issue does include an excellent article by the late Sven Walrus, who makes a convincing case that neither Bly nor Christian caused the mutiny. An earlier issue of British Heritage speculated that Bly and Christian, not exactly a new theory by this time, may have had a homosexual relationship. This provoked a very big flurry of letters denouncing that theory in the following issue. Specialist magazines like Naval History and Sea History occasionally published bounty-related articles, including these issues from 1991 and 2007. In 1998, Yankee Magazine, which has close ties to the Old Farmer's Almanac, I'm sure you're all familiar with, published his article about the visit of the ship Cyrus to Pitcairn in 1839 and its link with the famous Bounty Bibles. Now, as we saw in Mad Magazine, humor is actually sometimes employed in the Bounty Saga articles. Since 1925, The New Yorker has entertained readers with its clever cartoons. Here's one of my favorites, which implies that Bly's bad grammar provoked the mutiny. I hope you can see that the crew are holding their ears. They just can't stand it anymore. Now, in the August 2003 issue, the New Yorker got a little more serious, and they offered readers an excerpt from The Bounty by Carolyn Alexander, which had just a few months before its publication. Very wisely, they published an excerpt about the Pandora, which I think still, the people have seen the films and not explored any further. They really don't, they're not familiar with. I think they did a real good service by printing this excerpt. It also included some evocative illustrations. To tie in with Alexander's theory of Bly as a great hero, you notice that Bly looks kind of very distinguished and stoic, and she makes Peter Haywood look a little shifty, I think, don't you? Oh, my goodness, I think we've gone back to the 2004 presidential elections. Could that be? That's John Kerry, I believe. Anyway, this December 2003 issue of The Atlantic published Captain Bly's Secret Logbook, which was an amusing response to Carolyn Alexander, whose main objective was to rehabilitate William Bly's reputation. I'd like to close with this article, which satirizes Alexander's theory by depicting Bly as a weak, fussy commander. So I'm going to close with some excerpts from this piece and just set the scene, which is set up like a logbook. As the day of mutiny approaches, Bly makes the following entries into his log. That's Bly himself with a little dainty teacup. Now keep in mind, this is just a few days before the mutiny, okay? I wonder what Tara root beer was like. Next day. Now, I have no idea what 10 and Whiskers is. Maybe it was a real game back then, but he's pleased by the crew's behavior at this point. The day before the mutiny, he decides to make a meal and a special day for the crew. I especially like the lime cilantro reduction. I'm a big fan of that myself. And it's his own recipe. Let's not forget that. He really did take good care of his men, didn't he? But as you can see, 2 months later, after the open boat voyage, William Bly is still an optimist. Well, I think this presentation demonstrates that the Bounty Saga is destined to live on, not only in scholarly books, journals, but also in the magazine section of your local Walgreens or Barnes & Noble. And you might see me there someday looking for a magazine that just might have another new article about the Bounty or Pitcairn Island. So I hope you've enjoyed this brief tour of the Bounty Saga in the wonderful world of periodicals. Thanks.